Mr Borrows. A point of order, John Boscawen.
Mr Chair, I seek leave of the House to lodge with the House a copy of my letter to the Minister of Justice on the 14th of December 2009, requesting that strategic finance be put in statutory management.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there anyone opposed to that course of action? Appears not. Leave is granted.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, John Boscawen.
I seek leave to lodge with the House a copy of the Minister of Justice's reply to my letter, dated the 21st of January 2010.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there anyone opposed to that course of action? Appears not. Leave is granted. Chester Borrows.
Mr Chair, thank you, Mr Chair. It's good to be able to take the opportunity to review the year in this financial review of the Ministry of Justice and the work of the Select Committee and the officials from the Justice Ministry who have appeared before that committee. The comment was made by the previous Speaker of the work of the committee and the proportion of justice legislation that formed part of the 100-day plan and which has been transacted through the committee and through the House over the past 12 months. I want to take this opportunity to thank those members, those justice officials who have worked with our committee and members of our committee who have worked very collegially over the last 12 months to transact that legislation. And although there have been some significant points of difference, largely there has been a great deal of consensus within the committee in the way it should be, and what we would like to think was legislation that was relatively apolitical and something that certainly needs to be. I do take issue with a number of comments made by the previous Speaker as to the work of the committee or those things that appear to have slid past the committee. It seems a little difficult for a member of a party that isn't represented on the committee to be able to make those sorts of comments not having been within the room. The point is that those issues raised around youth offending are covered across a number of committees, have been traversed within the Justice and Electoral Committee as they have within the Social Services Committee, and it's important to point out a couple of points. One is in respect of the number of prosecutions of youth appearing before the Youth Court. Actually, the proportion of youth appearing before the Youth Court as a proportion of all youth coming to the attention of the police is staying about the same, which is about 20% of those people who come to notice of the police actually get dealt with by way of family or group conference along that youth court track, and only about 20% of that group actually appear before the youth court. The reason why there have been more young people appearing before the youth court is the scale and the severity of the crime, particularly crimes against the person, and so the ability to deal with those in other ways other than prosecution are very, very limited. It is important, though, to point out the work of the committee and the work of the Justice Ministry over the last 12 months in respect of the legislation that's come before the House. They have enacted, or they have worked on legislation that has been clamping down on criminal gangs and the ability to work within the P-trade, tackling the problems of violent youth crime, and that was what we were just talking about a moment ago before. Not long after the government came in after the 2008 election, one of the first pieces of legislation introduced was to strengthen bail laws to make it harder for violent criminals to get bail, rescinding a previous move of the previous government. And then the right to the introduction of the right, removing the right of the worst repeat violent offenders to be released on parole. Legislation that introduced the ability to take DNA from all people arrested for an offence punishable by imprisonment. It's probably the single piece of legislation that will have the ability to protect more victims than any other single piece of legislation this House is likely to look at, bearing in mind that securing a DNA profile from somebody arrested for a relatively minor offence is likely to prevent victims by way of identifying them if they ever escalate their offending, especially in respect of crimes against the person, leave any bodily secretion or hair at the scene of a crime, so that they will be identified and won't be able to go on to commit the level of offending that has been seen as abhorrent in our community. The Justice Ministry gave advice on the setting up of the Victims Compensation Scheme. This was the introduction of the $50 offender levy for any person convicted of an offence before the court. That money being put into a victims fund to assist in the education of victims as to their rights and the resources available to them to be able to attend, for instance, parole hearings or obtain child care while they're giving evidence in court, or to attend the hearings of the trials involving family members or that they are to give evidence in. And also evidence relating to the Legal Services Agency and the ability of victims of crime or the family of victims of crime to be able to attend parole hearings and coronial inquests at no expense. And we've had instances in respect of that which we needed to address. We were pleased to receive the support across the House in respect of that. Thank you.
Simon.